Hi, my name is Dr. Robert Cox Jr. and I am an assistant teaching professor here at the University of Southern Mississippi. I've been in this role for about 6 months now. I came here about 2 years after graduating with my PhD in counseling psychology from Teachers College Columbia University in New York. And I have research and clinical interests. My research and clinical interests are intertwined and really focus on the mental health impact of stigma and discrimination for people across the lifespan. And in my clinical work, I'm particularly interested in working with individuals who have experienced trauma in their backgrounds, but individuals who also hold stigmatized identities that might make it more difficult for them to attain mental health and well-being. The biggest thing that keeps coming back to me over and over again in my research, my clinical work, and just my anecdotal experience and my own personal experience, I noticed that when people experience any type of discrimination, stigma, ostracization in their daily lives, those individuals have to contend with the question of, is it something about me that's wrong, or is it something about society that's wrong? And the biggest factor that I see in individuals that leads to negative mental health outcomes is something called internalized stigma, right? And that is when someone receives negative messages about a part of themselves, about a part of their identity, and they start to internalize those messages and believe them, right? So the queer individual who is told by his or her religious family that queer people are going to hell, right? Or that because you're gay, you're going to get AIDS and die, right? Individuals hear these messages and they start to believe them and start to view themselves as less than, as inferior. It corrodes the self-esteem, it strips people of joy, and it just reinforces this message that, hey, you're different, and what's different about you makes you less than and even unworthy. And the saddest part of this is that many people start to believe those messages. And that's when we get into some real adverse mental health outcomes. This issue comes up frequently in terms of thinking about oneself as a learner, right? We're here at USM and many of us hold the identity of learner, right? Whether you're a student or professor, we're all in this continual process of learning, and some negative stereotypes and beliefs associated with different identities, specifically around race, manifest frequently in terms of their beliefs around black people can't do this or black people can't do that. And so I've had many students come to me and tell me, oh, well, we're just not good at that, or I just can't do that, or I'm just bad at this. And it evidences this real fixed mentality, this fixed belief. There's something called stereotype threat, right? And this research is really influential research about how individuals of color in particular can start to internalize negative stereotypes about themselves that exist in society. And I think we're not immune from that here in Southern Mississippi, right? And in fact, some of the racial stereotypes might even be more blatant here. And students come to me and they're like, Dr. Cox, I just can't do this. And so I see students believing negative messages and negative stereotypes they've heard about themselves. And then it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If a student believes that they're just bad at something because of some part of their identity and they believe it, they may not try as hard in that area or in that arena. So it definitely manifests here in the academic environment, and specifically at USM. The promising thing is that we know that when we focus on our shared humanity, when we are communicating with one another, coming into contact with one another, meeting one another, spending time with people who are different than us, and seeing difference as a strength and as valid, we can decrease stigma and bias in individuals. And so I'm interested in not only helping individuals who are the victims or the recipients of stigma and discrimination, but I'm also interested in working with people who are perpetrating stigma and discrimination and helping them kind of maybe change their views, enhance their views, consider alternative perspectives. One of the most beneficial ways of reducing stigma and bias is to put people with those who are different and give them a shared task. Well, in my classroom, for example, I really like conversation. I like dialogue and discussion, and I love students having an opportunity to briefly share with one another kind of their perspective. And so I give people a shared task, essentially, and they're forced to see each other's humanity, right? So what race someone is, what sexual orientation someone is, what gender identity someone holds, it becomes less important. And the more important thing is the task in front of students. So I use something called think, pair, share pretty frequently, where I ask students to think about a question, pair up with someone, share it with them, and then I have a few people share out in the classroom. That's one way where I feel really inspired watching students talk to each other, get really excited and animated at hearing different ideas and different perspectives. And because of the diversity that exists in the classroom and on the USM campus, students are forced to work with people who are different than them in one way or another. So I'm really inspired by watching students here work with people who are different than them, and I think that's the best way that I like to focus on it. I think institutions and individuals have a role in reducing bias and making sure that individuals who experience bias and discrimination are able to protect themselves and able to actualize their potential mentally, physically, etc. And so I think on an institutional level here at USM, one thing that we all can do better is normalize having explicit conversations about difference. Normalize having conversations about racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and just general xenophobia and intolerance. We have to be willing to talk about it and have difficult, uncomfortable conversations if we want to improve the atmosphere for people. And so that really is kind of an institutional and an individual responsibility that we all hold here. But in particular, people who hold positions of power like me, a professor, but also like our administrators here at this institution. I think on an individual level, on a programmatic level, we can also be thinking about opportunities for people to come together and learn about people who are different than themselves, right? And so when I think of working with student organizations, for example, perhaps, organizing opportunities, institutionalized and official opportunities for groups of people to come together and talk about difference and talk about similarity and see each other's shared humanity. So I think it has to do with the conversations that we have and that we normalize. It has to do with the events that we sponsor and that we hold, the formal opportunities that students have to come together and learn from one another, right? And not have to go and seek out those opportunities on their own because, students are overwhelmed and burdened with assignments and just trying to make it through, right? And as we all are at some point, but I think in particular, it's the onus of the administration, the professors, and people who are in the position to educate and take care of our youth to have these conversations and facilitate opportunities.